We are delighted to have you join us for this special and important event, Erasing History, Cultural Destruction in the Caucasus. My name is Nathalie Piranyan. I'm the chair of AGBU London, and I'm here with Lucine Khajadurian, the co-chair and the driving force behind this event. Before we start, I wanted to spend a few minutes introducing AGBU London. For those unfamiliar, the Armenian General Benevolent Union is a global organization dedicated to preserving and promoting the prosperity and well-being of all Armenians. Founded in 1906, AGBU has been a cornerstone of the Armenian community worldwide, fostering unity and pride. AGBU operates on 4 fundamental pillars. Education. We believe in the power of education to transform lives and communities. Through scholarships, which we do here in the UK, schools and educational programs, we strive to provide opportunities for the next generation to thrive. Culture. All cultural initiatives aim to celebrate and preserve the rich heritage of Armenia. From arts and music to literature, dance, and history, we support a wide range of cultural activities that keep our traditions alive. Humanitarian relief. AGBU is committed to providing assistance to those in need, whether through disaster relief, social services, or community support programs. Our humanitarian efforts are a testament to our dedication to helping others. And then finally, socioeconomic development. We work to empower individuals and communities through economic development projects, vocational training, and entrepreneurship programs. We have a global presence spanning across 97 countries with 500,000 volunteers, an international central board, including Arnaud Atamian here with us tonight, 61 chapters, including London, which is the committee that we are part of, and finally, 46 young professional groups. And AGBU London's role is to contribute and strengthen those 4 AGBU pillars. Tonight, we focus on the cultural pillar. The event is crucial as it addresses the cultural destruction in the Caucasus, a topic deeply resonant with our mission to preserve the Armenian heritage. By hosting this panel, we aim to shed light on the intersection of history, politics, and cultural heritage in the region. It is through such discussions that we can raise awareness, foster understanding, and advocate for the protection of our cultural legacy. Once again, welcome, and we hope you enjoy the evening.
Good evening, Your Excellency Varujan Nersesyan, esteemed guests. Thank you for joining us tonight to engage with such an important and timely topic. Following the warm welcome from the chair of AGBU London, it is my honor to introduce tonight's event and the groundbreaking book we are here to celebrate, which is this one entitled Monuments and Identities in the Caucasus. Before I continue, I would like to acknowledge The New Tears of Araxes, the powerful film we just watched, written by Sarah Pickman and narrated and produced by Simon Marakian, which highlights the urgent need to preserve the Caucasus region's cultural heritage. This book is the first multidisciplinary volume to explore the highlands between Armenia and Azerbaijan, shedding light on the endangered cultural heritage of Artsakh and Nakhichevan, threatened by policies of cultural destruction endorsed by the modern state of Azerbaijan. The volume features 17 contributions by renowned scholars from 8 nations, rare photographic documentation, and a detailed inventory of monuments. It is divided into 3 parts: historical geography and architecture, the development of Azerbaijani nationalism, and the loss and destruction in the light of international law. Now I would like to take a moment to recognize the exceptional contributions of the book's co-editors. So we have today with us Igor Dorfman-Lazarev, who completed his PhD and habilitation at EP Sorbonne and currently teaches Oriental languages at Sofia University, St. Clement Oritsky. His research focuses on the interactions of religions across pre-modern Eurasia and the genesis of modern national identities in the South Caucasus. Among his notable works are Christ in Armenian tradition, Doctrine, Apocrypha, Art. And we also have Haruchun Khajadurian, who is an engineer specializing in IT and project management. He has dedicated over 3 decades to field work and research on Armenian khachkars, the crossstones. An independent researcher, he has also co-authored works such as The Art of Khachkars, Armenian crossstones from Isfahan and Jerusalem, and continues his explorations in Armenia, currently focusing on the crossstones of Podai. So tonight we'll explore the intersections of history, geopolitics, and cultural preservation. I now hand over to the book presenter to guide us through this important book. So over to you, Igor. Thank you.
Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, dear friends, we started to devise this book soon after Azerbaijan had unleashed a war against the self-proclaimed Republic of Artsakh-Karabakh in September 2020. It is a collective volume, a fruit of collaboration between historians, archaeologists, historians of art, cultural anthropologists, sociologists, specialists in the protection of cultural heritage, and experts on international law. As we moved forward in our work of research and editing over almost 3 years, many of our worst apprehensions regarding the fate of Artsakh and its monuments came, alas, to be realized. The book thus holds a double purpose: to tell the story of Artsakh, as well as that of the neighboring Nakhichevan, and to reflect on the avenues for safeguarding, documenting, and studying what now remains of the cultural landscape and artistic heritage of these lands, as well as their memory. We focus on churches, monasteries, and carved stele, the khachkars. Since centuries, these landmarks have served as points of convergence for the Armenians, places of their commemorative and religious celebrations, as well as feasting, socialization, and hospitality. The past century has been marked by a progressive loss of Armenian monuments and cultural institutions on all the territories under the control of Baku. First, on the southern slopes of the Greater Caucasus, in the regions of Shamakhi and Nukhi-Sheki. Then, in the city of Baku, in the region of Ganzak, and in Nakhichevan. The book aims to awaken the world to the destruction that today, in a likely manner, is enacted in Karabakh. It is important to underline that the destructions in Nakhichevan and in Karabakh are not an outcome of inter-ethnic or inter-religious hostilities, as some assume, but a deliberate step undertaken by the state of Azerbaijan in its project of engineering a new national identity. According to Baku's authorities, there is no place in this identity for any trace Armenian, be it a church, a chronicle, an inscription on stone, a carpet, or even a name. The genesis of this identity and the historical revisionism that it underlies are analyzed in the book from various perspectives. Both Pan-Turkism and Stalinist autochthonous nationhood played a role in this process and in the ensuing cultural erasure. Theories of autochthonous ethnogenesis were endorsed in numerous regions of the USSR. In each case, they were bound to affirm themselves at the expenses of the populations of diverse origins, which were enrooted on the same territory, as the Armenians were within the boundaries of the Republic of Azerbaijan. The foundations for fictitious historiography were laid between the late 1930s and the early 1960s by 4 successive editions of the official history of Azerbaijan. Each advanced a divergent theory of the origins of the Azerbaijani people. I should stress that our investigation also affords a key for the understanding of much vaster a phenomenon characterizing the geopolitics of the Caucasus and the Black Sea region. Thus, since the end of the 1930s, the roots of the Russians were claimed by Soviet archaeologists to be discovered in the Upper Paleolithic culture of the Middle Dnieper area, it is in the heart of Ukraine. It was contended that this region had since followed uninterrupted material and cultural autochthonous development, which lately allowed to vindicate this territory as an inalienable part of Russia. The concern that has accompanied us throughout all our work is that the losses endured by the Armenians threaten their very existence as a historical society. In order briefly to clarify this concern, I wish to evoke the Polish jurist Raphael Lemkin. In summer 1944, it is almost a year before the end of the Second World War, he elaborated definitions for the policies adopted by Nazi forces against various national and ethnic groups in the occupied Europe. Lemkin thus distinguished several techniques of genocide, it is Lemkin's term. Not being a jurist, I am not qualified to determine which specific cases during the last decades can be defined as genocide. Besides, this term has frequently been misused. I'm only speaking as a historian interested in Lemkin's perception of the moment that we now see as the darkest moment of Europe's history. I ask myself whether the categories that he proposed may not aptly describe the danger faced today by the Armenians. Indeed, Lemkin spoke of a genocide in the cultural field. Examining diverse regional cases, he claimed that as a result of aggression against cultural institutions of the Poles, the Slovenes, and the Jews, these peoples were, I quote, deprived of inspiration from the existing cultural and artistic values, which rendered impossible national creative activities. End of quotation. Consequently, Lemkin estimated that survival of the nations themselves was endangered. A nation was defined by him in a very particular sense, not by any ethnic or territorial criterion, nor indeed with any reference to autochthonous roots, but precisely as, I quote, a human group capable of making original creative contribution to the world. End of quotation. It is such sources of inspiration for future creative work as the monuments of Nakhichevan and Karabakh are for the Armenians that despotic regimes threaten today in the Caucasus and in the Black Sea regions. To conclude, our book has a limited scope to recognize the disaster, to describe its amplitude, to explain its origins, and to identify those responsible. Yet the Armenians, both in Armenia and in the diaspora, need address themselves to the ways in which their creative potential, to which Lemkin refers, can be rescued despite the destructions and the disappearance of Armenian population on all the territories controlled by Baku. We hope that our book may be a helpful tool in this enormous task. Thank you very much for your attention.
Good evening, everyone, and esteemed guests. I truly thank AGBU London for hosting this event and for allowing me to present a critical issue where we explored in the book co-edited with Igor Dorfman-Lazarev. Why is understanding the condition of Armenian heritage crucial, because it reveals an ideology aimed at the falsification of history. This case demonstrates the failure of international organizations and highlights a systematic effort to suppress Armenians as historical witnesses. For over 2 millennia, Armenians have lived in a region where borders were not political or military lines, but boundaries of culture and identity, territory, population, and heritage intertwined. But why does this matter? To understand, let's consider what Marc Bloch wrote in his book, The Historian's Craft. Ignorance of the past not only harms the understanding of the present, it also undermines action in the present. A personal experience of mine, in 1985, I took a trip to Turkey in the east. What did I see? A population kept in a state of total ignorance who was living alongside with Armenian heritage in ruins. What about now? Let's start with Armenia's western neighbor, Turkey. According to a 1910 census, there were around 3,000 Armenian monuments in the region. Today, only 7% of these monuments remain in different conditions. Look at the photos. This is the official cultural portal of Turkey's Ministry of Culture, serving as a national inventory. Yet, many of the monuments I just presented are missing from it, and Armenian monuments are misrepresented or omitted altogether. This is not merely an oversight. We are faced with information denial, the deliberate withholding of knowledge. It's a denial of access to historical facts, which prevents a complete and truthful understanding of the region's past. Here we see the map of the inventory of Armenian monuments in Nakhichevan and Artsakh prior to 2021. Since the Soviet era, the cultural policies of Armenia and Azerbaijan have been in stark contrast. Armenia has worked to preserve its heritage, while Azerbaijan has sought to erase it. Before 1990, the conditions of monuments was already poor due to Azerbaijani neglect. The ideology was territorial appropriation as today. Let's take a look at some photos, past and present. Here, a recent example of destruction in Artsakh with the satellite proof of destruction on the right. Here is a so-called Caucasian Albanian temple destroyed by Azerbaijan. Why destroy what you claim as your own heritage? This is a so-called restoration of the Armenian Cathedral of Shushi by Azerbaijan. This graph on the left shows the level of destruction of Armenian monuments as documented in our inventory, while the map on the right shows the totally destroyed monuments. I would like now to show you the political inconsistency of Azerbaijan. Mr. Zeynalov, Azerbaijani representative, claimed on the BBC in 2005 that the crossstones in Jula Cemetery are not Armenian but Caucasian Albanian. If that's the case, why destroy what is supposedly yours? Why restore Christian wall paintings in Rome, yet destroy Armenian artifacts on your own land? The Heydar Aliyev Foundation has published an inventory stating that around 600 Soviet-era libraries have been destroyed in Karabakh. So why geographical coordinates are missing in that inventory? Now, let's have a look at what cultural patrimony represents in Azerbaijani context. This table highlights inconsistencies in Azerbaijani statements across official sources. For instance, the reported number of cultural institutions vary dramatically from hundreds to thousands. Who should we trust? Azerbaijani inventories mostly list Soviet public buildings like clubs, libraries, schools, but they lack GPS coordinates. How is this even possible? This excerpt is from the 1823 book History of Karabakh, written in Persian, translated twice into Turkish. In the second translation, the word Armenian was removed. These data come from Azerbaijan's official statistics. At the start of the 20th century, Azerbaijan was fully multicultural, but this has significantly declined. Azerbaijan views minorities as a threat to its nation state. Its strategy is simple: maintain just enough diversity to create an illusion, but not enough to manage their claims. During Soviet times, Azerbaijanis took no action to preserve this Armenian monument. All Armenian monuments in Armenia are labeled as Turkish or Caucasian Albanians. This example, from the Azerbaijani version of Wikipedia, shows the unscientific explanations being used to describe the Holy See of Armenian Church. To sum up, for Azerbaijan, patrimony is the spoils of war. I would like now to show the main risk with one very specific and huge impact: the political attacks on tangible and intangible heritage, including Armenian historical figures. This is the main impact, but consider the denial of information for Armenians. The most important task today is to reduce these risks. Can we do that? I believe the starting point must be the destruction of Julfa. We must put pressure on UNESCO to reveal the truth. Has the organization failed in its duty to provide accurate information? This is finally the satellite monitoring dashboard created by Cornell University. It shows the number of sites currently being monitored, as well as those destroyed, damaged, and threatened. The data it provides is essential for uncovering the truth. In conclusion, you already know enough, so do I. It's not knowledge we lack. What is missing is the courage to understand what we know and to draw conclusions. This is from Sven Lindqvist, from his book Exterminate All the Roots, One Man's Odyssey into the Heart of Darkness and the Origin of European Genocide. Thank you.
Thank you, Igor, and thank you, Haruchion, for your insightful presentation of the book. We have one example of the book here. If during the reception you want to have a look, feel free to ask us. Now it is my pleasure to introduce you to our moderator, Robert Bevan, who will guide our panel discussion. So Robert Bevan is an author and journalist, best known for Monumental Lies, Culture, Wars, and the Truth About the Past, as well as The Destruction of Memory, Architecture at War. His work has been praised by the Financial Times, Art Newspaper, and New York Review of Books. He's a heritage consultant and member of the Mayor of London's Commission on Diversity. Please join me in welcoming our moderator, Robert Bevan.
Hello, good to see you all this evening, and it was interesting in the film, the Jufa film, to see the position taken that there never were any Armenians in this area. We've heard that many times before. There were never any Bosniaks in the Republic of Srpska, never Aborigines in a particular area of Australia or Palestinians on their land. And cultural erasure is internationally a really important part of trying to establish those facts on the ground, and we need to guard against those facts being manipulated whenever they arise. So tonight I'm going to introduce your panel. If they could all come up, where are you? You're scattered around. So we have Emma. First of all, do you all want to come up at once, or are you going to make an entrance?
Always.
Emma, Yorgos, Igor, Harriet and Elizabeth. Hopefully their photo of them. If we get you in the right order. And there's a microphone to pass between you. Igor and Hout were introduced to you earlier when they were introducing their book. I will add to those introductions now for the people you haven't met yet. Anne Elizabeth Redgate is a senior lecturer in history at Newcastle University. She's an early medievalist specialising in Armenian history with an interest in comparative history. She's the author of many journal articles and book chapters on Armenian questions, the latest being Royal Building Programs in 10th and 11th century Armenia, the island city of Agatamar. Excuse any terrible pronunciations I know. And also this year, Virtues of the Good King in 10th and 11th century Armenia, a study in architecture, statuary, inscriptions and family history in the church at Agatamar. And then we have Yorgos. Yorgos Lediz is senior lecturer in Turkish at the Department of Languages and Culture of Near and Middle East at SOAS. His teaching includes courses on Ottoman and modern Turkish languages, literature and culture. And his research interests focus on Ottoman literature and Turkish culture, with special reference to frontier epic traditions and relations with Byzantium and Greece. And an area of particular interest is the bilingual Turkish and Greece literature. Al-Hamiado literature of the Greek-speaking Muslims of the Ottoman Empire. And then finally, Dr. Emma Cunliffe is a senior research associate of the UNESCO Chair in Cultural Property Protection and Peace team at Newcastle University as well. And her work focuses on the protection and destruction of cultural heritage during armed conflict, examining the reasons for damage and of cultural heritage and developing proactive solutions to protect it, with particular focus on the role of the armed forces and the place of national and international law. Very many publications, as you would expect, most recently the Rutledge Handbook of Heritage Destruction last year, And Emma is also active in various heritage bodies internationally, including a report on the implementation of international humanitarian law in respect of Georgia and occupied regions of Georgia. And that was conducted with that work with the NGO Blue Shield Georgia. She is also the conflict working group coordinator for UK Blue Shield and part of the Secretariat for Blue Shield International. And Blue Shield, like ICMOS, is a sort of part of, feeds into UNESCO, if you like. Great, so we're all here. I'll ask a few questions and then we've got about 40 minutes discussion, and then there's 15 minutes for the audience to ask their questions as well. And I'm just sort of kick-starting with some ideas, so please feel free to, if there's anything pressing you want to say, to take it in that direction. But first of all, I wanted to ask, I suppose, each of you in turn, really, what is particular to you about the fate of Armenian heritage and culture? Is it its distinctiveness, the continuity of attacks on it over the past century and more, the geography of it beyond a national boundary, or is it the relationship between the fate of material culture and our Armenian people? I'm curious about what drives you in this respect. So shall we start with who has the microphone?
All right, is this the microphone?
No.
Oh no, that's the microphone.
Well, stop.
Actually, I normally, when I'm teaching, I tend to shout, so I might be too loud with the microphone. Why am I interested in Armenian cultural heritage, Armenian monuments? I think it is, for me, it's distinctiveness. I mean, I am not Armenian, I'm not of Armenian origin, so it's not part of my family history or my growing up history or anything of that kind, but encountering particularly the art and the architecture, and of course I'm very interested in Aktamar Church, hugely distinctive, managing to be both international, speaking an international language, proclaiming an international status for Armenian kings, Armenian patrons, drawing on different international artistic motifs and traditions, and yet also being very distinctively Armenian, speaking this international language in Armenian terms. And I find that a very fascinating thing. So that, I think, is what pulls me in, which is the distinctiveness of Armenian culture, very, very Armenian, but not isolated, not insular, I mean, it's very, very important, very important.
Anybody else wants to?
All right, did you not? Did I kind of fade in and out then? Okay, sorry. So I would say it's distinctiveness, that it combines being very international in the international language it uses artistically and in architecture, drawing on different international artistic traditions, and yet at the same time being very distinctively Armenian. And I think that is hugely impressive and hugely interesting, and that is what has pulled me into, really, really caring about the physicality of the Armenian monuments and their preservation and presentation.
Great. Who else would like to speak? Emma, thank you.
Well, I don't work specifically in Armenia or on Armenian heritage. My work has always been more general, with a number of case studies internationally. But I have had the privilege of working with the Armenian National Committee of the Blue Shield, as well as so many other Blue Shield committees around the world. And I just have to say that I've always I really admire their passion and their commitment to their work, and I think that passion about Armenian cultural heritage is something I find very, very inspiring.
Thank you. I myself as well am not an expert at all with a specialty on Armenia, but coming from a Greek background and having grown up in Greece, in northern Greece, which was a town from Salonika that went through a period of difficult reconciliation with its past on several levels, and in being faced with the preservation of the Ottoman heritage there, and also then subsequently studying Turkish, I'm struck with the ways in which the treatment of the Armenians and the Greeks within Turkish literature and within Turkish culture shows parallelisms and differences. And of course the way in which, in both cases, the trauma of the Balkan Wars and wars that aim at civilian populations with a view to terrorizing them out of their territory, so that it can be claimed for one state or the other, has very much guided the process that was, unfortunately, in the maelstrom of World War I, very much responsible for the Armenian genocide, and then how, in the history of the country of Turkey, the Lausanne Treaty, in many ways, confirmed, with the compulsory exchange of populations that it regulated, this silence and this erasure of the past, as if the people in both respective countries of the exchange, just as has happened with the genocide before, hadn't really existed there before. It's, however, also very interesting for me to see the ways in which all the three countries, but as I said, I do not know much about Armenia myself, but certainly Greece and Turkey have tried to grapple with the difficult issues of that past, as bilateral relations fluctuated and went through periods of crisis and periods of rapprochement. So perhaps later I would like to say a couple of words about that.
Yeah. Thank you, Yorgos. Shall we, do you want to say anything pressing, or? No. I was just going to follow up on...
Should go ahead. Should we?
Go ahead, yeah.
No, I think that there are two, for me, there are two sides to it. One historical, because Armenian heritage allows us to interpret a very large region, not only Armenia. Armenia was, to a certain extent, also an international language. So it's a language in which historical chronicles are written about a vast region. It's also a language which until today is spoken by Syrian Christians, by Georgians, by Kurds, and it had been so before in the past, even to a large extent. So it is important to remember, so it is not a language of one ethnic community interested and turned to its own identity. It is not so. It is it's the result of, of the Soviet, of the and of the nationalist past of the history of the 20th century. The other point is that such monuments, such historical monuments, they structure the cultural consciousness of people. They represent symbols which interpret the landscape, and they also contain a story, contain a memory. So.
From that, it's interesting, like Igor, you were talking before that in your introduction that this is, in terms of Azerbaijan, this is a state policy rather than an inter-ethnic conflict. But also in the book I was struck by a phrase that the Azeris was said to have a heritage hatred. And that is referencing somebody called Benevolent and their book. I think Harut, in your piece you had talked about this. And the Azeri history was presented, and the whole, this context was stemming out of Soviet-era nationalism and within the various republics. And this is kind of contrasted with an almost genuine tradition of an Armenian culture in our Armenian homeland. And I found that a little challenging, and in terms of it felt like one culture was being validated and another wasn't. Am I misunderstanding?
Question for you.
Yes, yeah.
There was the principle of autochthonous origins
Yeah.
in the Soviet Union. So each nation was defined in territorial terms, and in territorial terms it had to prove its ancient history. And the reason was, one, to demonstrate the economical development, economical social development that would result in the revolution and under the guidance of the Russian people. That was one reason. And the other was to separate these communities. So each one had to have a past which was not a past of its neighbors. And so there was also a phenomenon of mimetism and mimetic reaction. So that for the Armenians and the Georgians, it was quite natural to turn to their ancient chronicles. And there was no space left for the Azerbaijanis to conceive or to elaborate their identity in a different way. There was only one way: to excavate the past and to identify oneself with this past. So there was no possibility of confederation or linguistic community or any other form. So each one had to do the same, perform the same operation. And looking at the Armenians and the Georgians, the Azerbaijanis had to do the same, and to prove that the past that could be discovered on the territory of Azerbaijan was the past of only of that particular linguistic and ethnic community. I stress that it was that the term. It was not so crucial in the past, and it is not as crucial, I think, for historical consciousness of either Armenians or Georgians or any other people speak of ethnicity.
Yeah.
But that was the concept which was legalized, that became normative in the Soviet era, and unfortunately still remains so. And you find them also in the official pronouncements, for example, of the Russian leaders who speak about in ethnic, continue to speak in ethnic terms.
We may want to add that more generally about how we these distortions of history in terms of supporting nationalist projects. How does that distortion of the past affect the future? How do we see that played out?
Gosh, this is a big question. I'm an early medievalist, and I have no specialist knowledge of these more modern developments, although I do also look at the development of national identities, including Armenian and various theories of national identities. And it certainly is the case that it's very common historically for an intellectual elite or government to try to encourage a sense of national identity by propagating a sense of a shared history. Saying, listen chaps, this is our history. And it may well be that the history that is presented as our history isn't quite what a modern historian looking back would regard as being a totally accurate picture. I mean, we can see this, for instance, with the English in Anglo-Saxon England, the kind of invention of a shared past. Now, over the centuries, this kind of slight falsification of history, it does get unpicked by scholars over generations. So, maybe distortion of history will not be permanent, but I'm just sort of trying to draw parallels from looking at early medieval examples and how they've played out in later centuries, rather than any knowledge of the current and very recent and modern examples of this.
Yorgos, do you have, you've obviously sort of the Turkish and Greek experience in this regard.
Yes, I'm not too sure how this would relate to the future, but there are rays of hope in the way the cultural heritage of Greek Orthodox and Greeks in Turkey and equivalently of Muslims in Greece has been treated recently. And luckily, though admittedly the treatment of the Turkish Ministry of Culture, especially in the last 10 years, is on a downwards trend in terms of the recognition of multiculturalism that it might have had in the decade before. Very interestingly and unexpectedly, but it's the horrible assassination of Hrant Dink in Turkey has led to an extremely good work, including work of documenting the cultural heritage of the Armenians, which may not find the support of the Turkish state as such, but is playing a leading role in showing Turkish civil society, which has made significant strides ever since the assassination in coming to terms in many ways, in more ways than one, both on an academic level but also on the public opinion level with the genocide and the treatment of monuments. And there is the interesting difference in the case of places like Istanbul and cities that retained a certain cosmopolitan character, even though the elements, as you correctly said, of multiculturalism is reduced just about to the tolerable level or even below that. But at least the Armenian churches and a lot of Armenian monuments in a city like Istanbul, which is an important city for the Turkish world and for the way others see the Turkish world, an awful lot of that heritage is now coming back to life in many ways. And of course it was never fully abandoned because the communities, especially of the Armenians, were always more vibrant compared to the equivalent Greek ones. Despite the acts of erasure and silence that both sides displayed towards each other's heritage, I'm talking now about Greece and Turkey, a full erasure has not happened, and I think at least that is hopeful for the future.
Thank you.
What I can, okay, I would like to add something. You talked about heritage hatred. I mean, it's a quotation from Omer's book. I think there is a specificity for the destruction when we analyze the destruction of Armenian heritage. There is a specificity, I think. First of all, it's the duration. The destruction started at the end of the 19th century, and they are continuing now. So more than 1 century of destruction we have to face. This is, I think, one of the specificities. The second one is the temporality. What does that mean? It means that when you compare the destruction, Armenian monument destruction with, for example, destruction we had in Afghanistan with Buddha, the Bamiyan, Buddha of Bamiyan, or in Syria and Iraq, or even in Timbuktu, with the mausoleum of Timbuktu. the specificity of Armenian heritage destruction is that it's not only during times of war. It's not only during the war. It's also during times of peace. This is second specificity. The third one is the historiography. Destruction of Armenian heritage have been accompanied, have been how can I say, all along the destruction, there is a new novel, a new historiography which have been created. Another specificity is the actors. It's always the same actors. Turkish state and Azerbaijani states. The other one is the geographical distribution of monuments and their number. We are talking about a huge number, 3,000 monuments. It's not a small number. Well, in Turkey or 700 in Azerbaijan. Only if I count only monastery, churches, and chapels. And finally, these destructions, along these destructions, there are ethnic cleansing present, always ethnic cleansing present. I think all these specificities make the Armenian heritage destruction quite unique in the world.
Thank you. That's an important final point. I think the sort of human cost, not just the cost of material object. Emma, this is the way that the international. Why do you think it's been so hard to enforce the various conventions and international law in this area? And do you think it's getting worse?
Ooh, okay. So why is it so hard to enforce the international conventions? Well, there's a few reasons. So firstly, I think there's a common misconception that international law just kind of floats out there and is magically implemented in different countries. And it's not, actually. You have to bring it into your own country's legislation, which means each country then needs to have the willpower and determination to implement it. So you can have that law, but then actually putting it into practice, prosecuting failures of that law are the next step. And when we look at the laws that protect heritage in conflict and in peace, they tend to be a failure because there is no willpower at the state level, but that's widespread, actually. So I've done a lot of research on this, and what you see, for example, the main law protecting heritage in conflict is the 1954 Hague Convention for the Protection of Cultural Property in the Event of Armed Conflict. It's signed by about 2/3 of the world, or ratified, which you would think would be brilliant, but as a single example, it says that countries should create a specialist unit, like the monuments men in World War II, who would go out for that country and protect heritage on the battlefield. And each country should do that, and I think I can count them in the world on my fingers. And I've had the privilege of working with some of those individuals, and they're amazing, but those units are very rare. States are meant to put measures in place to protect their cultural property in peace. They're meant to identify it, to say, this is mine, this is what is important to me, this is what represents my country, my nation, this is who we are. These are the physical reminders of who we are in the landscape. And there are almost no inventories. They're not there, they don't exist. And when they do, too often they're managed by a Ministry of Culture, which sounds like it would be ideal. But actually, culture doesn't necessarily manage archives, for example. Archives might be managed by a Ministry of Justice. Wonderful libraries like the one we have the privilege to be sat in now are often managed by education. Religious institutions often have no state management whatsoever because many countries have a separation between state and religion. So actually then when you go to the Ministry of Culture and say, what's protected? They say, oh, here is our list. But what they mean by that is those things the ministry have a legal responsibility in peacetime for. So then when someone wants to know what to protect, they have no idea. And actually then when we talk about different lists of monuments or protected sites, you get different numbers off everybody because people work off all these different lists. Maybe they do include churches, maybe they include war memorials, maybe they include Commonwealth war graves, and they're all pieced together in different ways to give completely different ideas of what's protected. But then you get to the problem that actually there really is just no will to enforce a lot of this legislation. There's never been a national prosecution of the Hague Convention, which celebrates its 70th anniversary this year. Is that a failure of international law? Maybe, but actually what we've seen in the last 20, 30 years is an increase in state attention to that legislation. We've got more countries ratifying, we've got more activity. Most of the units that are supposed to protect cultural property are founded in the last 20 years. States suddenly are looking at it and they're looking at what to do about it and how to care about it. I mean, I myself do an awful lot of military training, for example, particularly with NATO, and I have to say that the people I've had spend a lot of time working with, they're actually really dedicated. They have huge amounts of guidelines about protecting civilians, about the protection of cultural property, and they want to do their jobs well. I don't actually think it is getting worse. I think what we see is, firstly, a lot more media attention focused on it, and it goes through phases. A while ago, if you'd said, I'm going to do a story about some old buildings, the news would have gone, no thank you. But actually journalists come to us and they say, I'd love to do a story about your work. I mean, you was like the monuments men going out and onto the battlefield. And we say, well, actually, if you get that far in some ways, you failed. And we want to try and put in place protective measures in peace. And they say, well, that sounds really boring. Success is dull. We don't want to talk about success. So we don't see it, but those success stories are there, and there is hope. There are a lot of countries out there who do want to do the right thing, which is not to say they all do. I mean, the news is full of the total failures as well. But I don't think it necessarily is getting worse. I think we just see a lot more of it on the news.
That's a
long answer, sorry.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to discuss that? Thank you. Igor.
I think that one of the questions that we have to address is how the protection of national heritage can be explained and presented to a wider audience. Because after all, after the wars in Yugoslavia, and even before, we live in a world which tries to overcome nationalism, and in which national vindications and claims are seen often negatively, right? And one is not quite clear why for carrying on creative activity one needs one's particular heritage and memory, and these questions need to be addressed. It is very difficult to explain to them, and I brought an example of such a negative evaluation of claim done by a contemporary author. I can watch him if you have seen in the note. For whom just to claim a certain link to a territory necessarily means a kind of irrational element and underlies violence and nationalist hostility and hatred. So it is it is not well studied how one can protect, especially.
Isn't there?
Yes.
Yeah. As we have time for a quick final question before Q&A with the audience. What would be your first action to improve the protection of heritage, either within Armenia itself or beyond its borders? What would help most? Silence.
I think that there are two sides again. One is on a scholarly level, how one studies. On the other level is how the monuments are lived. And it's very important to bear in mind that the monuments we studied. Sure, I think that there are two sides again. One is on a scholarly level, how one studies. On the other level is how the monuments are lived. And it's very important to bear in mind that the monuments we studied in this book, they are actually centers, foci of cultural life. And cultural life does not mean necessarily life turned into its community. It is a life which is addressed also outside. These are sites of hospitality. These are sites which interpret the world in its vastness. On the other hand, of course, they have to be studied, and one has to, by studying, one realizes that they are monuments that allow us to interpret the history of a vast region.
Yeah. Yorgos, is there other lessons from the sort of reduced tensions between Greece and Turkey here?
Yes, possibly, thank you. I mean, I was going to say that the first thing I would do as well, not to sound too complimentary now just for this book, is exactly to promote good academic work in the first instance, and then other works coming out of it on the cultural heritage of given countries and given areas, mainly with a view to the area and the locality in mind rather than the state or the given language or the given culture at the same time. And a ray of hope, as I was saying, can be possibly seen from the way in which the Armenian heritage in Turkey, a small part of it, of course, not the material one, not the architectural one, but the contribution of so-called Armeno-Turkish, which is works published and written in the Armenian script, but in the Turkish language, which survive as manuscripts, which, as you said, luckily are somebody else's responsibility and not the Ministry of Culture, though the libraries are coming under the Ministry of Culture in Turkey as it happens. But nonetheless, the libraries are being preserved well, and the destruction of books is a little bit more difficult, not that it doesn't happen. And that kind of heritage, the more it gets studied and it gets promoted in the cultural media, the more and coupled with a sort of rapprochement and a strengthening of democracy and a strengthening of democratic institutions that exactly do not slip-slide towards authoritarianism, but help this promotion of the different voices in a world that always used to be multilingual. Let's not forget that we're talking about an area that monolingualism was not the exception. It didn't exist anywhere. There was no single area of what we're talking about which operated on one language, one religion, and never mind one state. So it's activities that promote that, and the prominence of Armeno-Turkish literature within Turkish literary scene in the last 20 years is remarkably positive sign on that front.
Fantastic. Elizabeth, do you want to add anything?
No, I don't think so. I was thinking about this particular question. when I walked here from my hotel this evening and thinking, no, I can't think of anything else other than what is already being done. And I'm very cheered to hear what Emma says about the rays of hope and success stories that don't get the news coverage, because clearly if that could build up, that would be the way to go.
I think Armenia would need to implement some of the international conventions better. I'll be honest, it hasn't done it either. So there are measures it could undertake on its own territory that would benefit its heritage. Internationally, people say, well, UNESCO is ineffective. Well, okay, but UNESCO is a body composed of states. So what we really mean is that the international fora of states coming together is ineffective because then the states argue. The Secretariat for Culture and Emergencies in UNESCO is tiny. It is underfunded. If you look at the funding that goes to the World Heritage Committee, which is newsworthy and impressive and less contentious compared to the funding that goes to culture and emergencies from states, they're quite different. So fund culture and emergencies more. And if you worry that, well, UNESCO is still composed of states and that can be very complicated in how it handles international issues, then, organisations like Blue Shield were founded to be the neutral alternative, and they're also desperate for funding. So there are these bodies that are out there that really do want to do this work, but nobody will fund them, and then people are very upset when the international body supposed to do this work can't do it. So I think that there's a lot of things that could be done there, and support that could be given to really get this work going. And I think and I won't say funding is the only reason it's not happening. Of course, it's very complicated. But even just that political show of support and goodwill to say these are the areas that we believe are important, I think would be hugely influential. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. I want to just do a very quick wrap-up before we move to the drinks reception. But first of all, I would like to thank the panel and Robert for this very enlightening discussion. If you can join me with a round of applause. I would also like to thank our partners in Vino, who are actually a company that imports Armenian wines, which we will be drinking now. So we have a reception with red and white Armenian wines. So if anyone hasn't tried them, tonight is your lucky night. And the AGBU team. So you've just seen Lucina and myself tonight, but there's a whole team behind the works to make tonight happen. So the team has done a great job at that. And then finally, because without that we'd just be talking to ourselves in a room. So thank you for coming, thank you for listening, and we will have wine to have this conversation and debates that you were talking about in the next room. So we can just go at the end of the room and follow people.